Hey everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan and today I'm going to be showing you how to replace a fuel pump for a 2006 Chevrolet Suburban, GMC Yukon, Yukon XL, the Sierra, the Chevrolet Silverado, and the Chevrolet Tahoe. All of those are on the GMT 800, I believe, platform. So they're basically all the same underneath. The Tahoe is obviously a little bit shorter. The trucks are a tiny bit different because the fuel filler neck comes in on the side, and that's where you're going to remove that. I think it's that way on the Tahoe, maybe not, but on the Suburban it has a tube on the back of it that goes into another saddle tank, so I show you how to deal with that. It's actually easier if you have a truck because it doesn't have that additional tank that a Suburban may or may not have. I don't know if that was an option for the Denali, which this is. It's a 2000 GMC 6-liter 2500 Denali. I don't know if that's a specific option, but the process is exactly the same of dropping the tank, replacing the pump, and there's a special tool you're going to need in order to get those fuel lines off. I show that later on in the video, but this video does apply to a large amount of GM truck models, so keep that in mind when you are looking for parts for this application on this vehicle. What I also recommend, I'm going to leave a link down in the description, the exact fuel pump I used for this application. I don't know if it's different as far as engine or trim level or anything like that, so your best bet is to go in the description to rockauto.com. I'm not sponsored by them, they're just a great parts house. Type in your VIN number and then it'll show you exactly which part for your truck specifically. So I want to go ahead and mention that. I'm pretty sure they're all the same as far as this platform goes, but I'm not 100% on that, and I don't want you ordering parts that are wrong for your truck. So go ahead and visit rockauto.com. And before we get started, I want to mention that you're going to want to siphon the tank as much as possible. This truck didn't run, not even for a little bit, so I kind of had to do it manually, which I show later on in the video. Just be really careful. Gasoline is obviously extraordinarily flammable. It's corrosive, it's bad to breathe, it's just bad to be around in general, and remove that gasoline in a gasoline safe container and dispose of it properly. I just put it in another car and used it because the gas is perfectly good. But if your truck runs, I would just keep running it until you know, you were down to maybe like a 1/16 of a tank, if you're lucky enough for your truck to still run while you need to do this repair. So that's something to think about. Never do this repair with a full tank, because a full tank of gas can weigh like 250 pounds, and negotiating that with the additional weight of the tank is really hard. So it's very important to have as little gas as possible in the tank. So I did this job on a lift. I am fortunate enough to have one. If you don't have one, you could do this job with 4 jack stands. You know, the really tall, beefy 12-ton jack stands. You know, you just want it to be up in the air enough to where you can get underneath it and drop the tank down, you know, about a foot, just about, so you can get your hands in there and remove the tank. It is totally doable as long as you have a flat surface, so don't think you need a lift to do this repair. You could honestly do it in your driveway over I don't know, a Saturday or something. The other thing before we get started is you're going to need to disconnect the negative terminal off of your battery using an 8mm wrench. With all that out of the way, let's don some eye protection and get started. So our step one is going to take us to behind the fuel tank, where this hose connects to it. You see that hose clamp right there? It's an 8mm. Loosen that bad boy off and pry, or not pry, but pull gently on this rubber tube, so that way we can get to siphoning gasoline out of here, because there's about half a tank in it and it'll weigh a whole bunch. And you can't just do it the old-fashioned way through the filler neck, because you can see this tube goes over here to like this reserve tank, and then it goes up from there into your filler cap on the outside of the truck. So no shortcuts here. You just got to take that line off, that hose off right there, the big one, and then we can siphon some gas out. So with that hose off there, we can slink in our siphoning plastic hose. Just want to shove that in until you're confident it's at the bottom of the tank. And it's important to note, if your truck still runs, just drive it until you're almost out of gas, then do this. But this truck doesn't run, so gotta do it the hard way. So now we can begin our siphon, making sure gasoline goes in a gasoline safe container. We're going to get some compressed air here and blow that past the tube like this. It's going to create a little vacuum in the hose, and it should slurp up some gas. There we go. Just like that, perfect. And now our tank is being siphoned. See if I can get a shot for you. See that? That is gasoline. And it weighs about 5 pounds. I think it's about 8 pounds a gallon, so the more you can get out of it, the better. It's really unwieldy trying to drop a tank when it's full of gas, so make sure you siphon all the gasoline out. And you might want to try this multiple times to suck up any remnants you have in the tank. So either when it stops, it's either ran out of gas, or the particular positioning you have in the tube is out of gas. Go ahead and try this a few times, make sure you get as much as you can out of the tank. Now what to do with this gas? This gas is perfectly good. It can go in any motor vehicle and work just fine, so we're going to go ahead and put it somewhere that it can actually be burned instead of sitting in a container. You could just hold on to it and put it back in the tank when you're done, but because I'm filming, it's going to take a few days and I really don't want just a big thing of gas sitting around. So with our 5th siphon attempt, trying to go further in the tank and around and left, right, best we can, we've taken out about 15 gallons, which is a pretty hefty amount of fuel. We can go ahead and remove our siphon tube. There we go. Now we're ready to move on. So our next step is to remove this plastic shielding. This shielding is here for fuel tank protection and also aerodynamic efficiency. I believe the trucks don't have this. I think this is only on the SUVs or maybe just the Denali's. And they have some bolts around here. I believe they're 13mm, and you just go around unbolting this plastic shield and it drops straight down. As you can see, I have a little bit of a problem here. I think you're supposed to put the lift there, or your jack stand there, so this can clear, but I'll figure it out. And now we can remove this plastic shield. Like that. Alright, so the next procedure basically is to drop the tank a little bit, because there's some connectors on the top of the tank that I can't show you obviously because the truck's in the way. But what you want to do is get a jack. I like using this transmission jack. You could also just use a floor jack if you're working on the floor with maybe a piece of wood, board of some sort, or you can get a transmission jack from AutoZone. You rent those for basically free. So we're going to undo this bolt here. I believe it's a 13mm. And this one here. And those are the 2 straps that basically hold the tank to the truck. So once you release those, you can unhook them from up here. You just push this up and move it back and remove these straps. So I was wrong before, those bolts are 15mm. Before you remove these straps, make sure you have your jack in place and it's nice and tight and in the middle of the tank. There's one. Comes out just like that. Do that for the other one. Now we can start letting the tank down gently. So now what we can do is lower our tank down very slowly. And once we get enough room to get our hands up there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the tank down, I'm going to disconnect everything, then I'm going to turn the camera back on and show you exactly what I disconnected, because there's really only enough space for my hands up there, you're not going to be able to see anything anyway. So before I go any further, I want to show what I've done here. First, what you need to do is remove this heat shield, or rock shield, whatever it is. This is a metal plate, it's held in with these little tangs here, and it has little crimp, I call them crimp washers. They just sit on there, you can pull those off with a standard screwdriver. And then up here there's a little evap vent, you just squeeze that, pull that off, and then there's this big line here. This sits in these clamps right here, so you need to kind of just pull that off. It stays up there, it doesn't come down with the tank. And then that'll give you plenty of room to come up here and unplug the electrical connector and the fuel lines, and then the tank is ready to come out. As long as you don't forget to undo that line right there. This is on the rear of the fuel tank. So just go around, double check, make sure there's no lines or anything still attached before you drop the tank. So once you've unplugged your electrical connector, it has a safety on the far side, so you kind of have to feel for it and clip that off. The only thing I want to point out before we move on is that these two lines are the same size, so mark the middle one with like a black Sharpie or a paint pen or something. And the middle one was quite tricky to figure out how to take off, so I'll go over that in just a moment. Let's go ahead and get the tank out of here. And once again, double check, make sure you haven't left any lines behind, plugged in or anything. We can lower this bad boy down. See, this is why it's important to have the tank as empty as you can get it, because this step right here and previous steps would be a lot worse if this tank was 200 pounds heavier. All right, so before we move on, I'm gonna go over exactly how I undid this. First, there's a plate on top held in with two 10mm nuts. You just remove that straight on. It is really easy. This has a safety in it. It's a little red pin. You pull out of it like this, and then it has another safety. You put your thumb under and remove, and you wiggle that plug on out. Be careful with these because they're made of plastic and this truck's 20 years old and it's very brittle. So now we can move on to how you remove these pesky fuel lines. So you have to remove the lines in kind of an interesting sequence. The first one is this far right. So you're gonna grab your 3/8 fuel line removal tool, link down below in the description. This exact tool I use. And this one's cool because you can use the side saddle there to slide it in. And then it helps if you push the line on while you're wiggling this about, and then you can kind of just take it off. This tool, what this tool does is inside this fitting there's little barbs that stick out like this. So this tool gets underneath those barbs, actually this way, gets underneath those barbs, puts them up, and you're able to remove the line. And they do that because it's a very secure way of putting a fuel line on here and for ease of manufacturing. So once you have the right one off, go to the far left one. Now this one's smaller, so you can't mix them up. This is your 5/16 tool. Same procedure, put it on the side and just wiggle this about, push the line in and remove it. This one's actually really easy. This came off in one try for me. Now, this middle one, it's the same size as your first one. It's that 3/8, but look, getting the tool on there was actually really challenging from above because the line collet is so big. I couldn't fit it in this space. Maybe if you had a thinner one of these tools, but the problem is if you modify this tool, it won't release those tanks fully, so what do? What worked for me is they make this. Slide it on the top, I rotated it around like this, put this one on top, wiggled those around a bit, push the line off, or push the line on, wiggle this around, push the line off, came right off. And this bad boy, this come apart piece, just saved the whole day. Link down below in the description. Buy this tool. These tools, they're not very expensive and they're absolutely essential. So what we need to do is rotate this top metal piece this way, counterclockwise. And the way we're gonna accomplish that is using an ice punch. If you don't have an ice punch, buy yourself an ice punch. They're not expensive and they're useful for everything all the time. And we're gonna put it right here and we're gonna tap that until this safety mechanism meets the other side. So now this safety is kind of smushed up against there. So what we can do is grab a standard screwdriver and just pry it out of the way like that until it just sits there. And then we can continue using our hammer and punch. Just like that. Couldn't be easier. Before we go any further too, go ahead and clean off the surfaces here. You don't want any dirt or junk getting in your tank. Just be really careful not getting any dirt in there. Dirt can clog up your new pump. And that kind of eliminate the purpose of putting a new pump in. There we go. Now I can remove the retention plate and then move our old fuel pump like this. Get the float out of there and our old fuel pump is out. Also a good idea at this point to take a flashlight and look around in there. Make sure there's nothing, you know, no big chunks or something down in there. The only thing that should be in here is gasoline. So if you find anything in there, go ahead and remove it. Now if you want, you can see there's a little bit of gas in there. Let's siphon that out. So the next thing we can do is compare our old unit to our new one. Our part number is AC Delco MU1322. I recommend buying the AC Delco pump because you do not want to do this again. So don't buy an off-brand pump. Always go with AC Delco. And then you want to double check your part numbers to match it up to your VIN on something like rockauto.com. There might have been a slight silent revision somewhere along the way, so double check with your VIN. And this looks absolutely identical. This has a little bit different colored float, but the essential parts you're looking at is relative size, the electrical connector, how many pins are in it, how many tubes it has, and the diameter of each. And this is identical, so this can go back to our tank. Before we install the new unit, we have to remove this seal off the old one because our new one did not come with one. So this is important too. Inspect this seal and make sure it's in great shape. This one's perfect. If yours doesn't look like this and it's all cracky and crumbly and gross, just go ahead and get another one. And we have our new unit here. Now what I like to do too, what you should do, is apply some WD-40 or any kind of inert lubricant that's going to help this slide on and not hang up anywhere. They make special lubricants that are just for this application, but I don't have it, so WD-40 is fine. There we go. It's going to go into place just like that, and we are good to go. I'm going to take some WD-40 on this terry towel here and wipe it around the inside rim here so our seal goes in. And we can insert our new fuel pump like this, and then take the sock, bend it down like that, put that in. Now remember how this went in, it went over here like this. So we can, it's spring loaded, so you have to squinch it down like that, and then we can get our retentioning plate. So you can probably see that it has a little tang and a little slot for it to go into, so that's where you're gonna aim for the fuel pump to go. When we're securing it, we can grab our retentioning plate here, go ahead and replace that the way we found it. There we go. Now push down, put pressure on it with your punch like this, and then hammer it back into place just like that until this safety looks just like that. It's nice and locked down, it's not going anywhere, and our new fuel pump has been installed. This is what your end product should look like, and you can even see through this little gap right here to make sure that that white tang is in that black slot, so we are good to go on that. So over back at the truck, they actually give you a pretty generous amount of room to work with the electrical connector, and that just slides back in like that, and then you don't want to forget your safety here. It goes into that hole there, just like that. There we go, perfect. So this can't accidentally come out. That'd be a bummer. And now we can lift the tank up further so we can get on our fuel lines. So remember all the pain and frustration it took to get these lines off? Well, luckily getting them on, really easy. So I'm gonna start with the far left one, it's the small one. And to install them, you just push on until you hear it click. Just like that. Then we can move on to our middle one, which I marked with black Sharpie. Push that on, easy. And then our feed line might still have a little gas in it, so be careful. And just push that on too. And there you go, the fuel lines are installed. How easy is that? And don't forget to plug in this Evap line way up here. The one that just pinches off. Just pinches off and you remove it. That one you just push back on and should be good. It's on the passenger side of the tank way over here, so as we're getting the tank closer to its home, these lines are going to be easier to put on. And then before we raise up the tank, don't forget to put this little plate on, 2 10mm nuts, just wrist tight is good. And then of course don't forget that line over there I mentioned earlier. And then once the tank is up in its home, you can put those two, the big line and the small line, back on. But right now it's just about getting the tank up into its home, and then once it's gotten high up enough, we can put this Evap line into these little retainers here. So you'll see how to do that once you get the tank a little higher up. It's going to take a little jiggling. Raise our tank. All right, and then we can replace the shielding here. Just goes up on those metal or plastic kickouts. And don't worry too much about reusing those push clamps or whatever you want to call them again, because the strap comes around and holds it on to the gas tank pretty tight, so it's not crazy essential to have those on. That's most likely for ease of manufacturing, those little metal clamps. So what you're looking at is one of the anchor points for the metal bands that hold the tank to the truck, and basically they slide in like this. They're a little tricky. There we go. So that is in its anchor point home. Now we can bolt the other side up. Now we can secure this band in its place, pushing the tank up while we're doing it to make sure this isn't cross-threaded. And we can tighten this up, but what I like to do is put the other band on too. So the second band goes on exactly the same way as the first. Has an anchor point, secures itself in, bands over, lift in, lift up, bolts in. Oh yeah, that looks good. Now the next thing we're going to do is take our 15mm socket and snug these up as evenly as we can. There we go. Once those bands are nice and secured, we can get our transmission jack out of there because the tank is reinstalled. And then don't forget to put on these two lines at the rear of the tank using an 8mm socket. You just slide right on, really easy. Now we can replace our shield. But if you have a truck, I don't think it has this plastic shield. Now we can replace this plastic shielding piece. And my rack actually prevents me from putting it on all the way, but what we can do is kind of let it hang on these metal hooks here.
So some footage got corrupted and I didn't get the final shot of putting those 4 bolts into that plastic shielding, but it's really simple. Just put the plastic shielding on, reinstall those 4 bolts, and your job is finished.
So that's how to replace your fuel pump in a 2000-2006 GMC Yukon, Yukon XL, Chevrolet Suburban, all the models I listed previously. The only thing I want to add at the end of this video is if you're doing a fuel pump, just go ahead and do a fuel filter. It's located right down on the fuel line towards the front of the truck from the fuel tank, obviously. And you can click up here in the card or down below in the description. I just did a video on how to replace a fuel filter for this exact truck. It's really easy and straightforward, and it's just a good practice to be into because you don't want your new pump to be pumping into a clogged filter. That can actually reduce the life of your fuel pump. And also another great tip to keep your fuel pump nice and happy for as long as possible is to, when you're driving it, you fill it up to full, only go down to half and then fill it up again. So that way your fuel pump is encased in a nice tank of liquid all the time. It keeps it nice and cool. That's going to ensure that it runs cool, and therefore it's going to run longer because there's less wear and tear on the parts in there because they're not getting as hot. So that's my little tip for you to keep your fuel pump running as long as possible, because doing this job is admittedly a pain in the neck just because the fuel tank is so ungainly and it falls down, and it differs from fuel tank capacity. I think this is the biggest one. I don't think they made a bigger tank than this. They certainly made a smaller tank for the short bed trucks, I'm pretty sure. I think those are 26 gallons and this is 32. So it's pretty much the biggest tank you can get without getting a secondary tank. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please leave them down below. I do try to answer every comment that I come across, so keep that in mind. Make sure you subscribe so you catch even more automotive content we have coming very, very soon. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.